I'm excited to welcome our next guest speaker, the Minister of Environment, Climate and Communications of Ireland, Eamon Ryan, who is joining us today live from Dublin. Minister Ryan is also the leader of Ireland's Green Party and a passionate advocate of the green energy transition in his country. Minister Ryan, welcome to Davos Energy Week.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very glad to be with you this morning.
Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure having you. I'm happy to pass this floor to you now for your introduction speech, and we'll be back with you afterwards to ask you a few questions.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's a dark morning here in Dublin. It's wet, surprisingly, and we're in the middle of winter, but and we're in the middle of a COVID crisis. So it's been a difficult period for everyone around the world. But there is spring in the air as well. The days are getting longer, and I'm very hopeful that our economy will start to lift and our society come out of this stronger. And that, I suppose, that hashtag you see everywhere, Build Back Better, is actually, I think, one that really does guide us. There's an opportunity here for real significant change and for giving new initiative for the green transformation that my colleagues want to seek. I see that I have responsibility for transport as well as the climate and environment brief, and I see particularly in that area where we can change the way our planning system works, changes our very connection with the local environment. And that also, in my mind, connects back in then to the energy transformation. It is all the three revolutions that are taking place in digital, in energy, clean energy, and in transport are all connected. And at this moment of change and transformation, I think if we apply the same collective effort, the same sense of ambition, the same sense of resolve that we have in managing the COVID crisis to the bigger, wider, fundamental, existential climate and biodiversity crisis, then we can build back better. Then we can actually use this as a pivoting point in our country, across the world. I'm working in so many different ways, we're all working in so many different ways to make that happen. Working particularly in the European Council, where in my mind so much of the policy direction comes from. And it's clear, I think there's real cooperation. I was only talking to a colleague yesterday saying on the European Energy and Environment Councils, I think there's real commitment now towards a common cause, towards the promotion of renewables, towards interconnection, recognizing that renewables will require balancing capability. And that comes from collaboration with your neighbors, sharing power, switching, moving power in a way that will be more efficient, more competitive and lower carbon. I also think one of the key other initiatives is actually collaboration wider in the international field. We're at a pivotal time, and this dark day in the middle of January, the US administration is about to elect a new president. And I think it gives us an opportunity for a reset, for building back better and changing things in a new way. I hope that the European Union, with the US administration and the Chinese administration and every country around the world, can use this next 9 months, particularly in the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow, as an opportunity to recalibrate and use that same spirit of collaboration that we've seen in COVID to switch to a green economy. I think one of the best vehicles for that may be the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which has specific responsibility in the area of short-lived greenhouse gases and how we regulate or how we account for those within the UNFCCC process. The Irish government is very proud to be just taken on a seat on the UN Security Council, and we're going to be chairing the working group on climate security. In my mind, one of the key projects is that we start looking at the issue of how we regulate methane, both fossil energy methane, where I think we have protocols now that could steer the world in a safer direction, but also in biogenic methane. Because I think that has the potential, or that needs real work for us to be able to get our climate project right, or climate ambition right. But also it has knock-on benefits in a variety of different ways. If we can ally our auditing of biogenic methane in a way that supports the likes of the European farm to fork strategy, but also supports climate adaptation in small island states and in less developed countries, I think actually we might be able to go into Glasgow with a really progressive agenda. Because if we really look at biogenic methane and start to define it as recognizing difference between the likes of pastoral agricultural systems, very low intensity, low levels of feedstocks from distant locations and so on, low levels of fertilizer and manure and other side effects, we may have an opportunity here to support a form of agriculture that is good for environment locally everywhere, but it's particularly good for Africa and other less developed areas or certain countries, less developed countries, where that sort of pastoral agriculture is the mainstay. It can be really beneficial in climate adaptation, and that gives real benefit in climate security, which is what we need at this time. So they're just some of the projects. Working with my European colleagues on energy areas, we're delivering that at home, but also working globally through the UN Security Council to our own seat within the working group on climate security to really define that as being climate security through climate adaptation, support for climate adaptation, and recognizing, which is the same issue in regard to COVID, that our security will only be enhanced when everyone's security is looked after. And that was the reason, that was the manifesto in which we sought the seat in the Security Council, and we seek to use it now in the next year in that way.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your introductory speech. I'm glad to see your optimism about achieving those challenging goals that you have set for yourself, your ministry, and your country. So let's talk about these goals. We know that the long-term goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland by 55% in 2030 and becoming net zero economy in 2050. Let's break down those long-term goals into short-term plans and obligations. So what are your key priorities for the next year or two to make those long-term goals achievable?
Okay. Coming back home then, and very much looking at Irish ambition, we have, first goal is political collaboration, consensus. And I think that's important, this is not a divisive issue. And we've seen that in Ireland in recent years. Our record in climate has been poor in the last decade, but I believe in the last 3 years, we're starting to show real leadership. I give you examples. We have introduced a ban on the fracking for our drilling or licensing for fracked gas, recognizing that would bring other complications and environmental problems that we don't want to see. We have actually changed our whole national investment funds to say we can no longer invest in fossil fuels in any of our strategic investment funds. We have joined the Oil and Gas Clean Coalition, a very interesting meeting with them last night, in saying we will no longer issue new licenses for oil and gas. So we have stopped the extraction of peat and will shortly stop the use of coal in electricity generation. And all those achievements, as I see them achievements on the climate side, have been because there was political collaboration. Similarly now, we have political agreement that in our very ambitious target to halve our climate emissions in the next decade, a huge challenge ahead of us, we start with some strength. We start firstly with agreement that renewables are going to be key, that we've already now got in our electricity 40% renewables, mainly from wind. And there's a lot of learning in that and how you balance variable renewable supplies in an isolated synchronized grid. We will also now go for a 70% target by the end of this decade. And a large part of that will be the start of a significant development of that will be the development of offshore wind. We're looking in subsequent decades, next 2 decades, to develop 35 gigawatts of offshore wind. And we know the real skill in that is how you, go back to what I said earlier on, how you share that with your neighbors, how you actually build a grid system and storage systems to use that power, because that's a multiple of our current use of electricity. It's a real potential economic gain for us. Secondly, and key one is to retrofit and improve every home. And to do that in a way that brings social justice with it. In the last budget, we set ourselves on a course that we're going to increase carbon taxation each year for the next 10 years, €100 a tonne. But critically, using the revenues from that to invest in social housing, in the upgrade of housing, in social housing and in housing for people in low incomes, so that they actually get a warmer, healthier home and we get a lower carbon footprint. And in doing that, you can introduce carbon tax in a way that is socially progressive. It's seen to benefit those in lowest incomes. Critically as well, to do what everyone's been talking about, this just transition. In areas like peat extraction, where we're no longer extracting peat for burning in power stations or for use in horticulture, we actually have to create alternative industries, create alternative investment and employment, so that those communities that relied on those areas in the past have a better and alternative future. Lastly, well, two other points, and I suppose I have responsibility for them. One is a radical shift in transport. We've taken a recommendation of the OECD towards investing 20% of our entire capital budget, transport capital budget, in active travel, in walking and cycling, which I think will bring huge benefits in planning and helping support this whole 15-minute city concept, that people connect back into their local areas. And I think post-COVID, that's going to be one of the patterns. And secondly, in public transport, to invest twice in public transport anything we invest in new roads. And again, to try and promote transport-led development, try and reduce the amount of mileage we are traveling on roads to cut our emissions in that way. And lastly, of the various major projects we have in place, one of the key ones I think is a land use plan, where we look at the entire island and look at, well, how do we manage our peatlands to store carbon? New forestry, closer to nature, continuous cover forestry, so that you improve biodiversity as well as storing carbon at the same time. And then reshaping Irish agriculture so that, that the produce coming out of Ireland, food produce, that everyone knows that that is actually produce coming from a really low carbon, high animal welfare, rich in biodiversity, pristine water quality, and lower pollutant system. It's through good land use planning, and I think providing, and this is again where we're working with our European colleagues, to make sure that the common agricultural policy supports and funds that environmental services in agriculture. There's some of the large main projects that we're doing here at home. Every one of them would require kind of a Herculean effort in its own right. Doing all 12, as I see it, the major projects that we have in front of us is going to require every government department, every political party, and probably 2 decades of commitment. But I think that's where we're at. I think there is across the globe an understanding that this new Green Deal is real, that the investment in this area is the wise and safe and intelligent investment, that we will learn by doing, and that it will deliver a better economy. And that's where we're going.
Thank you, Minister. I'm glad to see so many projects underway, and we look forward to watching their successful implementations in the next few years. With your 10-year goal to reduce 7% of greenhouse emissions annually, what is your target for the current year and how you're going to achieve it?
One of the problems with this issue is it does take time. When you invest in public transport, it takes many years to get through planning. When you start retrofitting homes, it takes time to build up the skills. The immediate reductions we will have the first few years, most of them will come from a small number of actions, but actually have a big effect. I mentioned there, we have about 61 million tons of emissions per annum, but one power station on its own, it's a large coal-fired power station, Moneypoint it's called, would account, or historically accounted for, about 4 million tons out of that total. By switching away from that, and it's happening now, the plant is running probably at 1/10 of that historic average, and will not be in operation for much longer because increasingly it's outside the merit order, and any European carbon price increasingly puts it further outside the merit order. But that gives you a 4 million ton reduction. Similarly, the extraction of peat in Ireland, and peat, for those who aren't aware of it, in very wet countries, where moss builds up over a prolonged period of time, and it's a very creates an organic material which you can dry and then burn, or for use in horticulture. But it has a very significant carbon footprint. Again, our main state company, which had been involved a long history, 70, 80 years of extracting peat and burning it and using it in horticulture, has said that they're going from brown to green, and that we will no longer be extracting. In fact, what we're going to be doing is investing and creating jobs in re-wetting the bogs and putting the water back so that you store the carbon and you restore biodiversity. And again, across that sector, it's a similar sort of reduction, those sort of 3-4 million tons potentially savings. So they're the upfront immediate changes you can make, which give you a bit of leeway and a bit of time to start ramping up the other alternatives, which is the generation of new renewable power, investing in retrofitting, changing transport. The truth is, particularly in transport and agriculture, it does take time. And even in energy, it will take time. But the decisions we make today will affect the changes in 7-8 years' time. And I think if we start on the path with some of the big generation projects changing, and then switch on to the efficiency and renewable and food and transport and agriculture measures, we get an early kick on the big generation switches and then a slow ramping up of the other changes. That's the pathway to achieve our target.
Thank you, Minister. Great to see progress on that. Let's talk about technology. So what are the low carbon technologies that your ministry will be focusing on sourcing or developing in the next few years?
I was always influenced by, I don't know if people have ever seen or read Jeremy Rifkin. I think he's been always a good, someone I admired when it comes to technologies and understanding what's happening. He described historically how there was a digital revolution and a clean energy revolution and how they were connecting, which I think they are. Anyone who works in the clean energy revolution knows that digital management of data is critical to understand what's happening. I would add a third revolution at the moment, which is in transport, I think is happening. And again, it's similar in the sense that it too depends on digital revolution, you know, car sharing and automatic transport mechanisms require digital systems. Also, the clean energy is going to electrify transport, which is just shows how all these revolutions are connected. But if I was pick one, and well, so many different areas, but I think it's actually understanding the central important role of grids and the use of digital technologies and grids to help manage this balancing of the power supply. The industrial revolution that's taking place is centered around this balancing variable renewable supply with variable demand. And whoever is really good at that balancing capability will be the center of the technological revolution, in my mind, because I think we're all going to go renewable, not all, but it's the fuel of the future. And the demand side is as important as the supply side in balancing that. And I think we've learned a lot of this as an island, which is isolated and therefore and with very large levels of renewable wind. We've had to really learn by doing how you actually manage that, how you, when you get really high levels of wind penetration, how do you balance it? And when you're very low levels, how do you keep running everything? And I think there's two aspects of that, it seems to me, two things that will be really key. One is at the distribution level, right down at the local level, because as I said, we're going to electrify transport and we're going to electrify heat. So in Ireland, I think it'll be heat pumps to heat the house and it'll be electric vehicles. So one of the real key questions is if you have a row of houses, terrace or an apartments, and you've several heat pumps and you've several electric charging points, which is where we're going, how do you provide that power on a distribution system that wasn't designed for that level of load? And I think it'll be by turning everything on and off in a very sophisticated, intelligent way and balancing, and by using distributed solar and other local battery supplies. So this dance between demand and supply at the local level, I think that whoever cracks that will have a real technological advantage because everyone's going to be looking to do that as we electrify heat and transport. And then second, on the transmission side, and again, our transmission operator has learned a lot by doing here because they've had to do it. I believe it's similar, it'll be a balancing capability. And in this instance, I think it's more likely HVDC grids, high voltage direct current with converter stations and really new sophisticated power systems. I know people know Eddie O'Connor, Mainstream Power, whatever. He's always talked about this super grid idea, and almost like the grid similar to an internet grid where you're able to ship power backwards and forwards in a very sophisticated way. Whoever is, and I think it requires international collaboration. This is why I keep going back to cooperation internationally. We will need to connect to the UK and to France and to Norway and to Denmark and Germany and even further south to Spain, northwest to Iceland, and using these new HVDC cables, which have real potential benefits. There's very low losses in long distance transmission. And you can manage them with sophisticated digital systems so that you run this transmission system. And I think that regional transmission grid system is going to be key for us to be able to do this balancing trick with renewable power. And I think it's a really attractive project in my mind because it also brings collaboration and security. If Europe even just thinks on this in terms with our friends and colleagues in North Africa, we share solar power coming from the south with our alpine hydro you have there in Davos, and solar from the south and wind from the northwest and hydro again from Scandinavia. You've got those big power loads. Having a regional grid initially, and in my mind beyond that then international grids that allow that transfer of power is going to be key. And it doesn't just apply in Europe. I mean, I was very fortunate to visit California a short period ago and realized that they have the same transmission grid issue that they have to address, that whoever gets good transmission grid networks in place will be able to switch on to this huge abundance we have in solar and wind power particularly, and geothermal and other sources, and be able to power an electricity system that powers the economy in a very secure and stable way. So sorry for the long answer, and it's very boring maybe for some people who are not interested in the technology, but I think it's all about the grids. I think it's all about the digital data management. And last thing I'd say on that, it's about public confidence in the sharing of data to be able to do that on the grid. You know, in that transmission, in the distribution system, when you're going into someone's home and turning things on and off and sharing power in a community local way, you need to have real confidence that the use and ownership of that data rests with the citizen, that the ethics and the values around it are ones that are in the interests of the citizen and the community, and bringing that community-centered aspect of this new energy revolution front and center stage. So it's getting the digital data system connected to community development. It is going to be the other part. It's not just about the technology or the economics. It's about the ethics and values that underpin it, in my mind, is going to make it work best.
Thank you, Minister. It's great to see that your plans on upgrading grids correlate with those of your neighbors. And you mentioned a lot of international partnerships that you're going to develop. Let's talk about the carbon budgets that Ireland recently introduced. These are 5-year economy-wide carbon budgets. Can you, implementation starts in 2021. So can you reveal more details of that and what is the main purpose of them?
Yeah, give a background, and you learn from your neighbours in loads of ways. I mean, I think our climate law that we're drafting at the moment was very much inspired by the UK climate law, which I think has been beneficial in terms of giving investment certainty over a period of time. We introduced our own law in 2015, but in truth, it needs to be strengthened. And so we're upgrading it at the moment. And what we've learned is to really think long-term, to set in place this planning approach where you've 3 5-year budget cycles and you continue to review and update to meet our net zero emissions by 2050, which every country now, any progressive country is setting as a target, which Paris requires us to do, Paris Climate Agreement requires us to do. Well, to get there, you do have to think in that kind of 15 multi-decade approach, and even thinking ahead just in 5-year chunks, 3 5-year periods for the next 15 years gives you a pathway for investment and a pathway for some of the changes we need to make. One of the other elements, and again, I'm just mentioning this because it's in the background. It wasn't just the climate law that has inspired this approach. There's also, well, there's a wider legal issue. Your gender case in Netherlands had a significant impact, I think. It was matched by a similar case here in Ireland, where local citizens brought a case to the Supreme Court saying, you're not taking climate seriously enough, you're not implementing what you said you would do in your climate laws. And the Supreme Court, similar to what the Dutch court had said, citing the European Convention on Human Rights and the right to a secure future and livelihood and living, said that yes, this is justiciable, that you, if you're writing these laws, you have to actually then implement it. So we're rewriting our law, putting in a new climate advisory council, which will provide government this long-term analysis and set the budgets for a series of 3-5-year budgets, and then continue to review them and amend policy or require government to amend policy. And it's that, so that I think just gives us countries make changes best when you do have policy certainty for a long period. And I always cite the example of Ireland, which Ireland made a strategic change in the late 1950s. It went from being a closed economy, we were protectionist in ways, and to being an open economy. We have been very successful at that. And one of the reasons, I think, is because for a 20-30 year period, there was real policy coordination and certainty around it. We made the strategic decision, and then we were able to make, in the kind of stable political environment around that decision, we were able to invest in education, join the European Union, set up good conditions for foreign direct investment, the sort of detailed measures that actually delivered on the policy strategy. And I think we need the same in climate. We need the next 15-20 year period where there's real certainty that this is a real priority. It doesn't change, even if you have a COVID crisis, or even if you have a financial crisis, or even if you have whatever, security crisis, that your administrative system, your investment world, your political system still knows that we will keep going with this transformation to low carbon. We will keep investing in that. And so that's what the budgets bring. They give you that, I hope this is the plan, they give you that investment certainty. And it's not like certainty in terms of the plan never changes. It is an iterative plan. We'd have to learn by doing. But that we do really hold ourselves to the Paris Climate Agreement. We do really go for, because if we don't, we're all in real trouble. So those 5-year plans are the legislative and legal means by which a series of governments go on the same path. I remember someone saying that once. They said, like, to win on this climate fund, we need to win the next, all of us who are interested in this climate crisis, managing it, we have to win the next 5 elections. You know, it can't change, it can't be stop-start, or we don't want it to be stop-start. We want it to be build on each government's efforts, build on the next. And that's what the climate law, and that's what those series of 5-year budgets are intended to do.
Thank you very much. So let's talk more about the government funding. One of the recent government funding programs you announced was 28 million euro for local energy projects. Can you outline the roadmap of government funding for the 2021 and 2022, and what will be your priorities in funding the energy projects?
Well, first priority, I'd say, is that it does have to be socially progressive. We do have to have a just transition. So we introduced our first budget in October in difficult circumstances. We're all managing the COVID crisis and huge investment in our health system and in social welfare system and in supports, I mean, beyond compare. But it's working, and hopefully, please God, will get our country through the immediate crisis. But what we also did is make a significant investment in green recovery. And what I thought was really important, what my own contribution or involvement to the budget was to say, we have to demonstrate that this is socially progressive. And our own Economic Research and Social Institute, which is kind of an economic independent think tank in Ireland, did an assessment of the budget and showed it did actually support those on lowest incomes. This will not work if it doesn't bring people out of fuel poverty. It has to be, it has to go back to what I said, everyone matters, every place matters. It has to be a better economy. Well, it has to be better that it doesn't leave anyone behind. And I think in our budget, we really tried to do that. One of the major investments was in the retrofitting of buildings. And I think it is one of the best investments because it can address fuel poverty directly. It leads to much better health outcomes, much better air quality and health outcomes. It's just comfortable, more comfortable homes. Improves your balance of payments, reduce fossil fuel import bill. It's very rich in employment and very stable employment. It'll be there for the next 30 years as we go to every single home. Like when we're going zero carbon. We're not burning any fossil fuels and energy in 2 decades' time. So we have 2 million homes. We got to go to every home in the next 20 years and make sure they're fit for purpose, not to be burning fuels. So, and I think what we targeted there is a very large amount of the funding goes initially to social housing, to housing with people in lower incomes, and target them so that we can show it as a progressive development. That's the first key one. I think in my mind again, and maybe I come from bringing the social justice into the economic analysis or the environmental analysis. I think that investment we're making in active travel is another, this in the travel side now, but it is critically important because I think that, again, I see that as a social project. It delivers a much better local social environment. It's much cheaper for everyone to be able to walk and cycle safely is the most effective means. On the energy side, then back on that, if I was looking at a third key component, it is come back to, I suppose, what I was saying there about this balancing capability. One of the other key projects we're doing is introducing a smart meter in every home. We'll have all 2 million homes in the next 3 years, 4 years, and having that smart meter to manage that balancing act is key. And last but not least, we've just introduced a new scheme for supporting microgeneration to allow people to self-generate, and businesses as well as households. And again, I think I'm focusing back on my pet project, which is this local distribution system, kind of in the home, getting energy management and energy production and energy savings right. We did a lot of work on climate communications in recent years, and one of the simple messages we said is bring it back home. You know, we're thinking always about the planet or about the big things, but working to help people have a really healthy and efficient home is not a bad place to start. Everyone tends to think of the really big projects, you know, the big, I could talk offshore wind all day and the huge floating offshore turbines. We need them all, and we need to get the big transmission grid right and everything. But if we could get people's homes right as first step in this transformation, I think we will retain and maintain public support. And that anyone involved in politics knows if you don't have public political capital to do this, you start running short on the ability very quickly to deliver some of the other bigger energy transformational projects. So I think starting in the home and that smart meter, solar panels on the roof, really efficient system, and then you put a heat pump in and put electric vehicle attached, you start to address a lot of problems. You start to and improve people's everyday lives. You know, electric vehicle, 1/5 of the running cost, same a fraction of the maintenance cost. Powered as part of your home energy management system where you've really good visibility on what's happening and how you manage it. That's a very attractive prospect to get right. Same with the heat pump. They really work. And switching all them on and off in tune with the weather systems as they come in off the Atlantic. And as you swap power with France and Britain at the same time and manage it all, this is doable. This is coming. This is a better system. This is the future, and it starts at home.
Thank you very much for a very elaborate answer. My final question to you is about a private investment. All your European colleagues whom we interviewed today and yesterday agreed that private investors is one of the key drivers of energy transition, and without this, by only public funding, they will not be able to achieve those ambitious goals. So what are your initiatives aimed at galvanizing private investments in energy transition projects right now? Are there any new initiatives, measures, or policies on the way?
Starting in the homes, as I said, we've to retrofit all those 2 million houses. It's a 50 billion euro plus project. The revenues from carbon tax I mentioned earlier will only provide maybe 5 billion of that. We will spend carbon tax revenues in a variety of different ways, but we've targeted the next 5 years, next 10 years, 5 billion from it to retrofitting homes. So that's only a fraction of what we need. The private sector will be key. Private investment will be key. What we're hoping to do is do something that ask the European Investment Bank to help and provide a guarantee on the first maybe quarter tranche of a loan that the state will provide a kind of guarantee. Let's say if you're going to retrofit your home, you're going to invest in putting in solar panels and a heat pump and energy efficiency. It might be a 30, 40, 50,000 euro investment. And to say, okay, we will, for any risk of default, we will take the risk on the first portion, the state, backed up maybe by European investment in that loan, European Investment Bank investment in that loan, and then bring in the other loans, other lending institutions to provide some of the finance for the remaining part of the loan, which is significantly de-risked in this way. And that in turn can bring down the cost of interest and cost of capital, and in that way make it a viable proposition. That's in the home. On the bigger international side, the key, I think, investment, particularly in the likes of offshore wind, which is going to be an area of huge investment, and connected to it, investment in hydrogen and other systems. And it's not just in the energy system, it's in the industries which will use the energy. So digital industries, heat, demand industries, cement kiln or whatever big industrial application use of heat, they've been interested in this too. But if you look at the generation side, the offshore wind, and I think we've reasonably experienced this, having got to 40% of our electricity coming from wind now over the last 10 years. What you do is you provide political planning certainty. You know, we're going in this direction. Every political party has agreed, change of government isn't going to matter. This is an investment approach. You need good planning. So we're introducing a new marine planning development bill that gives real kind of clarity, certainty, simplicity, and rigor in planning, because you have to protect the local environment as you do it. But if you get that right, you then bring in an auction system which is fair, open, transparent. And we've seen in other European countries, particularly for offshore wind, that kind of auctions that are well designed in that way, that allow projects to come in and bid in for particular amounts of offshore wind, really do work well. We will start our auction system later this year. We'll probably start with about 2.5 gigawatts in the Irish Sea to our east coast, and then follow subsequent auctions on a regular. So there's a pipeline of projects and investment opportunities, so that it's at scale and it's predictable and it's regular. You learn by doing and you mend. But so we will do something like 5 gigawatts of offshore wind in the Irish Sea, and then we'll really expand. I think the real potential, and this is subject to it scaling up in the way we expect it to, but I think it's fairly clear now that we're going to see offshore wind, particularly floating offshore wind, scale up and be a real potential. So we then move in subsequent auctions into offshore wind in the west, northwest, southwest. Our sea area is 10 times our land area. It's the windiest place on the planet, pretty much. And I think we've real scale in transmission grids, as I said earlier on, how you can store this, move it, and use it. And it's that kind of 2 decades. Okay, we start with 2.5 this autumn, this winter, and then we do it in 1, 2, 3, 5 gigawatt chunks of investment opportunities. We design and set up the transmission system so that you're selling into a transmission system that works. it has to be part, in my mind, of a Northwest European grid system. So you're not just, so that it's you have the balancing capability, but also you've access to market, and it just works. This is going to. I did some work in this in previous. We did some work with Imperial College in London, and we looked at what is the economic benefits if you take that integrated regional approach. It was hugely economically efficient, and as well as being works in a stable environmental or stable energy engineering way. But this is where it's going to go. This is, and all those oil and gas exploration companies, they're not going to be drilling for oil and gas in the future. They're going to be using that engineering expertise to put in these very large installations in the oceans, and putting in the grid connections and putting in the electrolyzers and hydrogen storage, and using that as a fuel for industrial heat and processes. I don't think anyone in industry disagrees now, or most people I talk to, the finance community, or most people in the top and main energy companies, I think they get that, yeah, that probably is where it's going in the next 2 decades. That's where we should invest. And it'll invest best where there's kind of stable, proper, independent rule of law, rigor around environmental standards and social and other standards. That's where you'd want to invest, because it's not going to change. It's going to be delivered in a safe, predictable way.
Minister Ryan, thank you very much for this interview. It was a pleasure having you at Davos Energy Week. I wish you all the best in implementing all your ambitious projects, reaching your ambitious goals, and winning the next 5 elections that you need to implement them.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Constance. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.